Hello and welcome to this recipe of my clone of Death of a Cowboy Pale Ale. This is the funeral of a cowboy. Death of a Cowboy is a 4% ABV Pale Ale. The original beer is based on Chelmsford Brewery Death of a Cowboy Pale Ale. The grain mill's settings I used for this brew were speed settings of 4 and a gap setting of 6. It's a 23 litre batch with 3.7 kilos of extra pale malt, 290 grams each of caramel and Munich Type 2, 150 grams of torrefied wheat, 60-minute kettle hop addition of 5 grams of Magnum, 20-minute whirlpool addition of 60 grams of Azeka, 40 grams each of Columbus and Centennial, and a dry hop 3 days with Citra Cryo and Simcoe Cryo. Mashing in this beer, I mashed in, got the strike water up to 68 degrees and then added the grains, stirred them in very well to make sure there's no dough balls and make sure everything's wet with a hose while still stirring before putting the lid on and starting the circulation on the mash timer. After 10 minutes I take a portion of the wort to test for the mash pH. The mash pH for this was 5.48 using a calibrated pH meter. This was a 30-minute mash, so after roughly 25 minutes I took a portion of the wort on a white plate for an iodine test to see if the mash conversion was finished. As you will see, the colour remains iodine colour, a nice light brown, which indicates that no starch is left in the mash, so conversion is complete. I'm happy to move on to the mash out stage. Sparge is simply a case of lifting the mash basket and running the preheated water on top of the mash. I like to float the mash, which basically means you leave 1 centimetre of sparge water on top of the mash as it drains through the grains. When the sparge is complete, ramp up to the boil and stir in any proteins that form on top. This homogenises and mixes everything well so you can take a pre-boil gravity reading. In this case, the pre-boil gravity reading was 1039, which gave me a mash efficiency of 82%. Weigh out the hops. In this case, is only 5 grams of Magnum to add at 60 minutes. Stop the boil timer for when there's 15 minutes left in the boil. Sanitize the CFC. Here you'll see me using the mash hose to clear out the pump to make sure there's no bits of flour and bits of husk that can be stuck in the CFC and cause blockages. Then you just want to start running the pump, running the hot water through the counterflow chiller and collect the first 750 ml to 1 litre, and that's to be thrown away. Once the hot water's flying through the CFC, you can then start circulation and start the whirlpool. Ensure that the CFC temperature goes above 75 degrees Celsius to ensure it's properly sanitised. Once you've sanitised the counterflow chiller, you can wait for the boil to ramp again, and then as it gets up to 100 degrees, or 99.5 as it's shown there, you can start the timer again. Wait 5 minutes and add the 10-minute additions, which in this case is half a Protofloc tablet and 5 grams of the orange yeast nutrients, because I'm using a wet yeast in the last fermentation. Ensure that you give the wort a good stir to incorporate the 10-minute additions. Here you'll see I'm putting the outflow from the CFC back into the kettle to create a whirlpool, which helps to mix in the 10-minute additions. When the 60-minute boil is over, it's time to add the 20-minute whirlpool hops. In this case is Azaka 60 grams, 40 grams of Centennial, 40 grams of Columbus. The whirlpool here is carried out at 80 degrees Celsius and it runs for 20 minutes. Stir all the hops in and then start the pump running until it gets to 80 degrees and let it sit for 20 minutes. Start the timer, allow it to run its course. When the whirlpool is over, it's time to turn the cold water onto the counterflow chiller to cool the wort down to pitching temperature, which in this case is 17 degrees. So once you start getting 17 degrees wort running through the temperature probe, you can then start to run the wort into the fermenter and oxygenate the wort. As you're running the wort into the fermenter on top of the yeast cake, don't forget to take a final gravity reading. In this case, the original gravity was 1050. When using wet yeast, it's essential to oxygenate the wort as it goes into the fermenter. I use 2 30-second blasts using my Blickman air stand. Yeast uses dissolved oxygen to metabolize and grow more cells quickly. Not oxygenating wort with wet yeast can cause issues, cause yeast stress, longer lag times and potential off flavours. I hope you enjoyed this video and find it informative and would like to like, share the video and subscribe to my channel for more content. Thank you very much.